Oh, is that the beginning?
What did you find this on?
Huh? Oh, I own it.
Okay, I had to watch a bootleg on YouTube, so the quality wasn't amazing. It's been a while since I've seen it, though. But...
Right. Why don't you own it? It's so good. It seems like right up your alley. This is like feels like classic Spielberg, from like the 80s. And even like right off the jump, you get the Amblin Entertainment logo. You haven't seen I have not seen that since probably the last time I've seen E.T.,
Okay.
So because that was Amblin, and Amblin was like that was like the punch to the gut that Steven Spielberg brought to like movie theaters in the 80s. I mean, like Amblin was like Goonies and E.T. Maybe Back to the Future was part of that. So it's crazy to see
Yeah, it
Amblin.
was, prior to DreamWorks.
Yeah. So it was crazy to see the Amblin logo again after so long. And then it's like, is that intentional? Is it just like they're trying to really, really hit you in the mouth with all this 1980s nostalgia, So I don't know what putting your finger on your nose and pointing to the camera means. I don't know what that means.
Charades. What, you never played charades? Like,
no.
It's on the nose. You figured it out. Yeah.
Oh.
No, I think
what
it
has
is.
two thumbs and has never played charades?
That guy. I don't know how much. Like, I didn't dislike it, but I wasn't like, oh my god, I gotta run out and buy this. And like either time that I've seen it.
How is that possible? Like, why? Why don't you like it? I'm so curious. We'll get there. We're going to be talking about Super 8. I fucking love this movie, but apparently Brian's like, yeah, it's okay. Bummer.
Yeah.
Bummer, Brian.
Yeah.
It's just okay. This is the same as all the other 1980s movies.
Maybe you can change my mind.
Man, this did nostalgia way better than Stranger Things. I'm just going to say that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I kind of felt
way
the opposite.
Better. How?
That'll be.
I'm getting angry at you because I feel like you're being contrarian right now.
Come on.
I'm serious. How do you not like this? All right, we'll be back in just a second. I got a bone to pick with Brian. So, oh man. So let's talk about some news.
Breaking.
Well, it's very breaking, and it's like it's hard to know where this is going to fall, really, as a whole. So, Brian didn't know anything about this before we started, and I did a rundown. So I'm going to do a rundown for you all. So, just a quick and dirty version. But a couple weeks ago, right before Thanksgiving, I read an article that Disney Plus, not all of Disney, but just the streaming service, lost $1.5 billion. That's a lot of money. And that's just for 2022. And it's not the whole fiscal year yet, So why is that? Sounds like a lot of money, and it is. And to put that in perspective, that's 1/3 of Lucasfilm. That's all of Star Wars.
What the acquisition of Lucasfilm cost.
Yeah. So that, Star Wars and Indiana Jones and whatever, So it's a third of that. It's the third of that was what Disney lost, which is staggering. Just on that's newsworthy alone. Like, that's a lot of money for a company to lose. And even if you're thinking of like hundreds of millions of dollars, like a CEO should be fired, right? On the heels of that, a couple days later, the current CEO, former current CEO, Bob Chapek, was ousted as the CEO of Disney. And then Bob Iger, who was the former CEO, was reinstated. Okay. That's really interesting. Now, this is something that normally happens when a company does something and they screw up. Usually the CEO is fired. That's not a new thing. Or they resign, because that's the leadership, right? And if they led the company into shaky ground, then they're not good leadership. They're not good leaders. Well, come to find out, what Bob Iger realized is that the former CEO was cooking the books for Disney. Now, what that means, because there's multiple ways you can cook the books, is that he was hiding the losses of Disney Plus to great extent. There's not a real reason yet why he was doing it, but that's really problematic for numerous reasons. Um, and for me, on a personal note, it makes me wonder what we're going to lose because of this, because that money to get Disney Plus profitable is going to have to come from somewhere. That somewhere is going to be properties inside of Disney's larger umbrella that they can cut to maybe indefinitely or for good. Those things could be movies that are in pre-production right now or shows that are in pre-production right now. So this is so breaking, and the wormhole is so great that the other shoe hasn't dropped yet. We don't know where this thing's landing yet, but
Mm-hmm.
I found it really fascinating. And I told Brian, I was like, the last time I heard of like this type of money problem, right, to this magnitude was like Bernie Madoff. Like Bernie Madoff he ran that huge pyramid scheme and now he's behind bars,
Right.
you know, or no, not behind bars. I think he might have unalived himself, basically. You know, I'm not sure where Bernie Madoff is right now.
Well, but the analogy stands. It's one of the
Right.
greatest white
It's
collar criminal instances in
right.
American true crime history.
That's right.
Yeah.
And this it's the money. It's not a pyramid scheme all over again. It's where did this money go if it was there? But like you still lost the 1.5 billion. It's not that that was a false statement. But it's like if you cook the books, you don't know where money's going. Also, this type of money is like what you would use to acquire other properties or to greenlight other productions. So it's interesting where we go from here.
Mm-hmm.
It's very bizarre, and I feel like you know we might be in for a rude awakening as consumers of Disney products, and that's Disney, that's Marvel, National Geographic, that's Fox. uh it's a lot of stuff, so Hulu, you know yeah, it's kind of blows my mind, man.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah.
Yeah, that's a real interesting bomb to go off there. I know that they've said since the beginning that Disney Plus was expected to be operating at a loss, and it was like a crazy amount of loss. Um, the only reason I can think of off the top of my head for why someone might cook the books or whatever to make it look like you're operating at a loss is to cheat the shareholders, because that kind of thing happens in feature film budgets all of the time, where you have these movies that make $500 million, but we've never turned a profit because we had to pay the theaters back. We had to do, there's always someone else in a line before the people who put up the money and the capital originally. And that's kind of a famous thing with some shadier productions, and I'm not gonna name names, but like there's very major studios that have done that, where biggest movie of the year, and they're just standing there like Charlie Chaplin turning their pockets inside out, like we didn't make any
Right.
money, it had to go over here and there and back.
Someplace else. Yeah.
So I mean, regardless, it's a nefarious practice, and we don't know. We would like to stress that again, like nobody
And this
knows,
is
this is
like,
so breaking.
yeah.
But that's the only reason I can think of that someone would do that. It's certainly not to save their job, because it's like, I mean, if you work at the grocery store and your cash register comes up $1.5 billion short. Like, you're not just out of there. You're gone. You're in jail, locked up, thrown away the key.
Right. Like I was
Unless
gonna
there's
say
some
that, like,
other,
yeah.
yeah,
Like
angle
it's
to
so
that.
much money that it's like how would jail time not be in the equation or being thought about? It's so much money. Like
Yeah.
it's an incredible amount of money,
Well, and it's the
and
same
to
sort of like
do it.
shady thing as like, devaluing real estate to prop up your
Yeah.
assets to do this other thing. It's,
Oh
basically
yeah.
the equivalent of that. If that is in fact what's happening, we don't know. No one knows.
All we
Only,
know
only
is
Bob Iger apparently.
only Bob Iger knows. But I mean, on the flip side, there is like some good news coming out of this that does have me. I am worried and excited at the same time. I'll say that. Because also on the heels of this, Bob Iger has then put creative control back into the creative's hands at Disney. So that means like we're going to have creative people making creative content, not content created by committee. So if you were thinking that some shows were just kind of bland or weren't matching your expectations, that could be one of the reasons why. So if you're going to put the creative forces and say like, okay, you guys have control of this to do what you want and to make a good story, that's what he specifically said in his letter of him taking over again. He said that he's giving creative control back to the creative people. We'll see how that pans out, but that's something that I would like to see, especially with the last, Star Wars movie that was in the theaters was mediocre, to be polite. And I haven't been too impressed with I know I might get some flack, but I have not been too impressed with the MCU on TV. So we'll see where things go. Could be for the better, Who knows if that's actually going to rise to fruition.
Well, he's got 2 years to prove you right or wrong on that, because when we were talking off stream, you said he was only signed back on for 2 years there
Right. Well, he
to
was
kind of do
CEO for
damage
like a
control
decade. Yeah, that's basically what it is. It's damage control because of what the former CEO did, and then to at least get Disney as a whole, as a not like the parks or anything, but the media side moving into the right direction that it should go in. And that doesn't mean 100% like creatively. That means like creative and financially. Like let's get this ship going in this so it can be self-sustaining and make good content. So that's a big ask for 2 years, but we'll see.
Sure.
We'll see. So
All right.
yeah.
Are
Wow,
you
man.
ready to jump back into this now?
Yeah. I'm ready to know.
Back into Super 8.
Yeah. You thought this movie was mediocre.
I didn't.
No. Don't say, oh, I didn't really say that. It's kind of what you said right in the beginning.
I didn't dislike it. I did say that right in the beginning. I didn't dislike it.
And
Yeah, I don't know. I just it's probably has it's like a bunch of like little minor things, like little minor quibbles that I'm probably making a mountain out of a molehill with.
I would
And
say that's accurate.
I think that okay.
Without even knowing what you're gonna say.
All right. Well, podcast over. Hi. We know how this is gonna go. Yeah, just put those knives to the side for right now. Yeah, it's like little minor quibbles, and I feel like we've been in the nostalgia business because this movie came out. What is this 10 years old already?
It's like 13.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like we've been in the kind of like grind of the nostalgia machine for so long that we've seen other things tackle this in slightly more effective ways. But the Stranger Things comparison, I was going to bring that up because I did really feel like this was like, did they get part of the idea for Stranger Things from this movie? Because it's like, kids riding around on bikes, you got aliens, and I don't know, it paints on a very similar canvas, but I feel like Stranger Things does it better only in the sense where we've gotten so many seasons from them that
Sure.
they can paint with a broader canvas than a 2-hour movie can.
Yeah, of course. Like even Stranger Things season 2 gets to have the kids dressed up as Ghostbusters because of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like they're able to hit like uh pivotal times in the 80s that like a movie can't, because this movie takes place in like 2 days. Uh but the reason why I say it's better than Stranger Things is that this feels like it came from the 80s, not that it's calling back to the 80s. That's the difference that I see. I see Stranger Things referencing the 80s as best as they can. I feel like this movie was like a lost gem from the 80s that was uncovered miraculously. And they're like, oh, we didn't know we'd ever find this movie again,
Okay.
type of thing. I think the aesthetic that they do with making, or that J.J. Abrams did, even with his god awful lens flares everywhere, uh, he managed to capture what a 80s movie actually looks like. But that could be because of Steven Spielberg's hands were all over this movie. It makes me think that it wasn't really J.J. Abrams. It was almost more like a sock puppet, or like, what is that? Like, what do they call that when there's like a politician that's puts into an office, like the head of a country, but it's like, oh, a coup? No, that's not exactly right.
Yeah.
But what is that called?
Well,
Like,
I
we're
think
gonna
you.
install
Well,
our
they're a
leadership.
puppet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a puppet government. Yeah, no, I think you hit it without even trying there. Um, that is one thing that bothers me about Stranger Things is whenever they lift quotes directly from movies, but like they
Yeah.
do it unironically, where like they're referencing the movie, but like they're not doing it in a way where it's like, oh, it's because we've seen this shared movie together. Like Stranger Things 3 was really bad about that, where you had so many quotes from like, Die Hard or the Terminator, like you're a policeman, police have rules. It's like
Right.
the Russian guy wouldn't know that. He's not
Sure.
just making some kitschy reference. Like the Russian guy that looks like the Terminator is just,
Yeah.
saying that line because they want to hit you in that nostalgia spot. That bugs me and that always rips me out of it. And I was really glad they got away from that in Stranger Things 4 because I did feel like that was one of the better, way too long, but one of the better, best seasons overall. Um, but
But
anyhow,
that begs the question, Brian. It begs the question. Could it be as good if it wasn't as long?
I don't know. That's a whole subject for another discussion there about whether or not Stranger Things 4 was too damn long or not. um, Now, let's go back to you saying that Spielberg had his hands all over this. Did you find up some behind the scenes dirt on this? Because we know he's kind
Oh
of a
no.
hands-on producer.
He is a very hands-on producer. We talked about that with like Poltergeist, and
And
the
Fright
fallout
Night.
from that. Yeah. I didn't find out, other than the fact that it's so apparent that this is a Spielberg movie that was directed by somebody else, right? Like this is the this is exactly what Back to the Future was for a lot of people. There's so many people that believe that Back to the Future is a Steven Spielberg franchise. and he was just a producer. And it's the same type of thing with this movie. You know, I feel like Robert Zemeckis is a great director, but you can see Spielberg's fingerprints all over Back to the Future, much like the same you can see with this movie. And it's, you know, like, for example, like, this is a J.J. Abrams movie, and then his logo is second. The first logo that you see that pops up is Amblin Entertainment. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that too often. You know, I mean, you look at like Mission Impossible 3. I don't think it will. I mean, maybe uh whoever made that had their main logo in front of it, but not, because it's like you'll have like your Universal, your Paramount logo that's extravagant right in the beginning as soon as you hit play, but then there's usually the other company's involvement, and it usually cycles through like which is important, you know.
And there were so many logos in this one too.
Yes,
So
yeah,
many.
tons of logos. Um, but yeah, Amblin Entertainment's first, and like like that seems like that's a minor thing. And my hunch is that it's more for nostalgia than it is for anything. Not that Amblin Entertainment is back into production like it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just trying to make this like an all-encompassing throwback to the 1980s.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, kind of
because
like
like
in Land of the Dead when they use like the old Universal Monsters logo from the 30s.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's trying to package something together to as a throwback to something else. You know, um, but when you see it as a full package like that, when it's presented this way of these types of colors, this type of logo, kind of, you know, like vintage aesthetic at this point, that's why I say it does it better than Stranger Things, because the whole package feels like it came from the 80s. I only think that Stranger Things came from the 80s when I'm actually watching people interact, you know, or the surroundings, you know.
Now, let me ask you this because yeah, you were a big fan of Fear Street. So,
Yeah.
particularly the first one because that one leans into the 90s.
Hmm.
Did you get the same sense of that as well, like the Stranger Things, like it only felt like the 90s when people were interacting, or did you felt that that did the 90s better?
I think that Fear Street nailed the nostalgia. That's also kind of, I'm glad we're talking about this because I wanted to bring up nostalgia. That's why I wanted to actually talk about this movie, is like how powerful nostalgia is, because I wrestle with it. I feel like Fear Street did that better once again than Stranger Things. There is something with Stranger Things where it's like it's hitting like 85% of it, but it's not all the way there. And it almost feels like it's an alternate reality instead of, you know, the reality that it wants us to believe it's from, you know. It's like, yes, it's from the 80s, but an alternate reality 80s, you know. And that's how I feel about Stranger Things.
Okay. Should we just? I feel like everybody who's listening this far probably understands the plot of this movie, where it's kind of a alien invasion, but
Yeah,
not really. I mean, because the alien kind of just wants to go home.
it's not even an alien invasion movie. It's like it's I mean, it's an adventure movie like Goonies. Uh but the catalyst to cause the adventure is the shenanigans that are being caused by this monster trying to escape. You know, like it's you know, it's the typical like uh you know, like nasty clandestine government trying to do something nefarious, and it just turns out that the monster is just kind of misunderstood but really angry, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and it wants to leave. um it's pretty simple. Like you see this kind of a lot in the 80s of, and like, you know, like you mentioned, the kids riding with their bikes and everything. It's like, hey, yeah, you got that in Goonies as well. You got that in Monster Squad. It
E.T.
seems like it seems like it's just a trope of 80s movies that have a predominantly child cast to it. It's like that just seems to be, yeah, like, yeah, we're gonna ride our bikes everywhere.
That's what they did.
Right. The other thing that I would say that this movie, that another thing that I want to talk about, and we can talk about it later, is this movie I like a lot because it seems to have a soul to it. And I feel like we're lacking in movies as a whole with having that grounded aspect to it. What I mean by soul is like these interactions that the kids have seem real. They seem like they're friends. It's written well, all of that. They seem like they're a group of people. And like you can kind of identify, like looking back at friends I've had growing up, it's like, yeah, you can kind of place your friends into this group. And I feel like we're also seeing that less and less in movies where there's that, it's like, here's the spectacle, but you don't care about any of these characters. And then to pin so much of this movie onto like a tragic event that happens right in the beginning, you know, it's yeah, I don't know where you can find these types of stories too much anymore.
The
You know,
tragic event being the train crash.
no, his mom dying.
Oh, okay.
What other tragic event? I'm giving you a little shit here, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't consider the train crash trying to get the alien free tragic.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's just kind of destroyed the town there, and you talk about the military being evil, and they were so evil.
Well, yeah,
the the
yeah.
the dad's kind of I don't know. He's just a terrible father, just surrounded by beer cans constantly and not encouraging. But so the with the train crash and the whole thing with the military being like super evil, where it's like the one doctor crashes his truck into the train to get it to derail.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then but he's like a military guy, and then they go to like kill him to cover up their own stuff. It's like the depths of their
Oh,
depravity
they're
doesn't seem to know any bounds.
they're the worst. Like all like that is like keeping this alien in captivity. Like now, part of this movie, it's like you're meant to fear the monster. Like you really are. And there's several scenes where the reveal of the monster is terrifying. Monster slash alien, extraterrestrial, whatever. It's not an ET thing. It's like a kaiju. It's like a kaiju baby running around in this town. But yeah, what they do, it's completely understandable how this alien's like, I'm gonna kill all humanity. Like, I'm literally just trying to go home, and you guys have me in a cage. Like, leave me alone. So yeah, it's kind of understandable when it's like, yeah, the military who's evil doing evil things, and then you have this monster like attacking it. You're like, yeah, that's kind of just desserts, isn't it? Like, go ahead, monster, eat all those things.
Mm-hmm. I started to get a little annoyed at how many times someone was about to say something important, and then it got interrupted by something exploding.
Yeah, yeah.
That I don't know. Like I said, it's just like a lot of little, kind of things where I just thought
I
it was
have
a
a question. Like, you say it's like all these little things, but there's so little that like they all like what are the little things that's like have bothered you so much where you're like, yeah, this movie just doesn't do it for me. I'm so curious about that.
yeah. I thought some of the dialogue was kind of corny. Um,
Well, what about like E.T.? Because I want to compare it to other movies that I think we both like.
uh huh.
but I don't think you would levy the same criticisms at.
Yeah, I haven't seen ET in a while. I mean, like a while. um, so Blake gave me the DVD because he got the 4K version of it. I've been meaning to watch that, but I just haven't gotten back around to it yet. That was like right before Halloween, and so it's like, well, I'm in more like the Poltergeist kind of Spielberg mood. So, um, yeah, it was mostly just times when characters would just say what they're thinking. You know, when like the guy was high, and then like, oh, drugs are so bad.
That's funny to me because it's like they're really not. Like, but it's like the childhood mentality of like not wanting to cross that line because you think that your world's going to go to chaos if you do one little tiny amount of drug, you know? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um but I don't know. Like I feel like the dialogue matches any of the other 80s movies that people love. So I'm trying to narrow it
You think
down
they can
like
get away
your
with it because they're kids, because it's that
yeah,
kid mentality.
exactly. I think like there's a certain amount of leeway you can give kids when you see them, even though they're being played by actors, that you can give to a cast because it's like I think they're writing it that way as if a kid would say it. So of course something that flies out of a kid's mouth, especially under stress, is not going to be the same as an adult, you know? And it's going to be a little bit disconnected from reality, a little bit immature, but like yeah, I don't know, like I feel like there are those types of that type of acting or that type of dialogue in so many other movies that because they came out so long ago we disregard those aspects and say like, oh well, they don't matter in that movie but they matter in this one, so why do they matter in this one and
Only
not
because
those?
we've gotten older and become more sophisticated, whereas you give things kind of a nostalgia pass. You're probably not wrong. I mean, I put off watching this movie for I don't know how long because I thought it was a found footage movie, right? Because it's called Super 8. But
Oh my god,
the camera
you
doesn't necessarily figure super into the, I mean, it figures into the movie because they're kids making a movie. But like I'm talking like way back when this came out. Like I avoided watching this for probably like 4 years when it came out because it's like, oh, it's another found footage movie, and I just didn't want to watch it. But I did finally watch it, and it was fine. You know, it also came out like right around the same time as Cloverfield, and for whatever reason, I kept getting the two of those mixed up. Whereas Cloverfield was a found footage movie, both J.J. Abrams projects, right?
Yeah, but I think J.J. Abrams was just a producer on Cloverfield, right? Like
Was
I
he?
don't think, yeah, I don't think he's like the director. I mean,
Okay.
I could be wrong. I know for a fact he wasn't with 10 Cloverfield Lane or Cloverfield Paradox because
Hmm.
that was Trachtenberg for the second one, 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Yeah, and God knows
Um,
what happened with Cloverfield Paradox. That was awful.
yeah, it was interesting. Like there were a lot of concepts that I liked in it, but that's just like my science fiction kind of like I gravitate towards that stuff, but as a whole, kind of like I don't make sense of some of it, a lot of it,
Hmm.
and it feels like it was a different movie about a completely different thing. And then they threw the Cloverfield monster from the first one at the very end to be like, see, it's the same.
Yeah.
What I can gather from Ted Clover or Cloverfield Paradox is that they were trying to build something up in space. It created a rift in reality, and then a monster came and attacked New York, and that's how we got the first movie. That's all that movie added.
Hmm.
So, 10 Cloverfield Lane's really good though.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I really like that one. But anyway, yeah, no, and again, that's just stupid crap that's on me. It's just like kind of like brand confusion, getting the two of them mixed up there. But Cloverfield's the one that I shouldn't have watched because that was a found footage movie.
I
Whereas
Man,
this one wasn't.
I feel like I'm being a contrarian right now, and that like my statement that I said to you is false, and that it's just me instead. I do really like Cloverfield. Uh, yeah, just Cloverfield. Uh, I don't know what it is. I find myself watching a lot of found footage movies. That's like one of the better ones. It's definitely like in the small list of really good uh uh found footage movies. To the point I own that on 4K. That's a 4K movie that I bought. It's like,
Well,
yes, yes, please. I think it's great. Um and
see how that lo-fi presentation looks in 4K.
it looks really good. It's I mean, there's an aesthetic quality that does make it look like it's shot from a Sony Handycam. So, but
Yeah. What are those in 2022?
yeah, y'all know what tape is. Um, no, I do really like Cloverfield. Um, it's like that one. We're going on a tangent. We're just gonna go with it, right? So that one and like Pacific Rim are the things that are the reasons why I'm watching Godzilla movies today. You know, so we can poo poo found footage movies or this or that, but it's like these actually like were gateway movies to me to like a larger thing that I really wasn't interested in until these movies came out. So but then on top of it, unironically, I think Cloverfield is actually a really good story. So say what you will about my opinions in the comments down
Okay.
below.
Um, yeah, I really can't comment on that. I remember being so fed up with found footage and just how it was just everywhere. And it's like the characters were kind of just recording based out of sheer determined stupidity. Because if you didn't have
Oh
that,
yeah.
you wouldn't have a movie. You know,
Yeah. There have
they
been
certainly had their heyday, and it was. I'm glad we've kind of like moved on. It's not that it can't be done well. Cloverfield might have
yeah.
been done very well, but I was just so tired
Well,
of it.
there, it's no, there's no doubt in my mind why you would be tired of them. There was like a good decade in there where it just seemed like there was everything was a found footage movie, right? Because it was like we had Blair Witch, and then it was kind of silent for a while, right? There wasn't a lot of found footage movies, and then like Paranormal Activity came out, and that was the end, right? Like after that there was a decade of
Floodgates.
found footage movies galore, and tons of them were terrible, like with cameras that move around so fast you actually get seasick from it. But then on top of that, but what has been cool to see is that it become kind of come into its own, I think, over the past 5 or 6 years, where it's actually contributing what I think to be good stories that I do recommend to people, uh, and have come with, that have rewatchability. I've never rewatched a Paranormal Activity movie, even though I've seen them all. But I've rewatched The Bay and Taking of Deborah Logan. Cloverfield's another one. I think these stand up away from the sea of found footage movies that are garbage as like, hey, these are actually good examples of how to construct a narrative using this style of movie making that's actually entertaining, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Um, so, and not just for shock value. I felt like that was the other part of found footage that was problematic was the excessive use of jump scares, you know? It's like the only way that they could make a scare was like, here's some low buzzing hum to let you know that a scare is imminent. And it's that process of delaying that scare to finally get to the jump scare that made people jump. But it really wasn't scary. It's just something you weren't expecting.
Yeah, or
It's
they
a knee jerk reaction to something you're seeing on screen, not something that's truly scary. you
Yeah,
know.
or they do the opposite where they just play the sound effect to fake you out, and then when something was actually going to happen, there would be no noise. It's, bah.
That would be subversive, right? And that would probably get a really big scare, but they don't have the guts to do something like that.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
that was the first Paranormal Activity because I caught on to that really quick. But so back to Super 8 here.
Yeah.
Um, maybe you can clear this up for me. What was the deal with the alien Rubik's Cube thing?
So that was like, okay, so the alien is like, I don't know how to describe it other than super brain power, right? So like if he touches a human, like the kid, the doctor, or the scientist that try to derail the train, um they have a psychic link, right? So they're able to communicate telepathically. But I think broader, the alien, that's how he controls the ship. So the Rubik's cubes are the equivalent to, parts of a car, basically. Once you get all the pieces to a car, you have an automobile that you can drive. You know, Once he gets all these pieces together, um, he can repair his ship or parts of it. The other parts he was constructing. You know, or she. I don't know if the gender of the um, alien was revealed, but he, I guess.
Do you think that CG holds up very well?
Um, Not in fast motion, but when it's slowed down, like when the alien picks up the kid Joe, uh, when Joe's telling him to leave instead of attacking them, just to leave, like we want you to go so you can leave. Uh, that looks pretty good still, but then there are parts where I don't think it looks good at all. Like the bus sequence,
Mm-hmm.
where the kids are in the back and the bus is I forget where it's going, but it gets attacked on the road by the alien. Um, in that sequence, it doesn't look that good to me. It gets a little bit of a pass because it's dark. I think if it was in daylight, you would be like, "Oh, this is terrible," But it's a pretty dark sequence. The alien's almost black. You kind of are just seeing motion anyways, so it doesn't really take me out of it. But I do notice that it doesn't look as good as certain other parts of the movie.
Yeah, it's fascinating how like CG. Yeah, I mean, even with like Deep Blue Sea, right? Like we were 3 years removed from Jurassic Park, and it's like, how does this look so bad?
Right. Yeah.
And Jurassic Park in a lot of ways is still the gold standard for a lot of that stuff. I mean, there's movies that come out today that don't look as good as Jurassic Park. It's like, how is that even possible? That was 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, like that was man. Yeah, I don't want to go too far into Jurassic Park, but seeing that in the theater, like not expecting it was like jaw dropping, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like it was like, what the fuck? This is crazy,
Yeah.
So because it just looked real. You didn't ever see something look like that. And to have that experience is like, oh, that's amazing, Uh I feel bad for people younger than us, Brian, because it's like they never got to experience that, you know? They just have CG when it's like, that's not clay. That looks like a moving photograph. you know?
Yeah.
Wow, the advancement.
Well,
Like,
yeah, and they also grew up with the internet and like
yeah,
like
everything.
what do you mean you just have this? Like
Yeah. Yeah, I remember scrambling to meet up with my friends. And this is in high school. This is pre cell phones. Scrambling to meet my friends before they left after school on a Friday to make sure I was included in whatever plans. Because if you didn't know the plans by the time you left high school on a Friday, you weren't doing anything all weekend, you know?
oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're not just texting someone, it's
Yeah.
Yeah, they
What do we
didn't
do?
have a
What's
phone you could
happening?
pick up. Wow.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, we didn't have any of that. It was all by word of mouth. Yeah, sometimes it would just be that, like, someone would tell you that everyone was meeting over at somebody else's house. Like, you weren't actually specifically invited by that person. You were just like, yeah, we're meeting at so and so's house at this time. You know, so foreign now, right? And if someone shows up to my place without notifying me first, I'm angry. You
Now,
know?
yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
not cool. Back then, it was
Yeah.
like, hey, yeah, come on in.
Yeah, come on in. Now
Um,
it's like, what the fuck? What are you doing here?
I will say
Gotta
that
block him.
I will say that like a lot of the CG that did look really good were like the helicopters and some of the more physical environments getting smashed apart and things like that. Because that's to me that's the hardest thing about doing good CG is it's the stuff that we have a frame of reference for is usually where your brain's like, that's not real.
Hmm.
But the stuff that you don't have a frame of reference for, you can typically get away with it. And that was one thing that kind of jumped out at me where it's like, well, the monster doesn't look that great, but I shouldn't have that frame of reference. Maybe it's just because we've seen so many monsters and things that have been done fairly well now that we feel like we've experienced it vicariously. And we're so good at blowing crap up that like we can just do that down to a science.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's we're spoiled and cynical at the same time for movie making or like watching it, consuming it.
Hmm.
Because it's like we're in an era now where it's like everything can look so damn good. And we get a little jaded on that. So we go and see CG that's 15 years old, we're like, man, that looks like shit. And it's like, but at the time it looked great. It goes back to the nostalgia thing in a weird way. Why do you think it is where we give certain horror movies a pass from the 80s that have pretty terrible special effects, but at the time were good? We give that a pass, right?
What's an
But
example of that?
I'm going to get some hate. I don't think the werewolf in The Howling looks particularly good, right? I think it's okay looking. At the time, though, that looked amazing, right? You know, but going back to see that movie, we're kind of like, it's still, people will argue that it's a good movie and that you should watch it. It gets recommended all the time, all those things. And I feel like everyone doesn't want to acknowledge that it doesn't look that good anymore. We have had other movies that make it look better, but we keep going back to that, but giving that a pass when I think there are better examples now,
Okay.
you know, but we don't give CG a pass. So are we is it kind of like we're just used to practical effects and giving it a pass, or like what's the difference? You know, I
Well,
feel like there's a level of inconsistency there with how people view movies.
but I think that'd be a great question to have someone who's a little bit younger from us to have their
Oh, sure.
perspective because do they do that with CG or are they just like, oh yeah, it's a monster? Whereas I feel like that's how we kind of feel with like the Howling and Bad Moon, where like some of the I mentioned during when we were talking about that movie that some of the reviews were pretty hard on it, and there's a couple of times where it's like, yeah, it looks like a Halloween mask someone's just kind of grabbing someone's throat with, but like, yeah, it's okay, like, man, it's a monster from the 90s, like.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'll have to give that some more thought. Like yeah, what is the key difference, or what I would think is the key difference between the two different mentalities? But I see it in myself, though, as well. That's why I'm bringing it up. Is I don't know. I feel like we can easily spot bad CGI and give it some shit, even
Hmm.
though it's like pretty old, like a pretty old movie. Like we're talking about Deep Blue Sea. Was that in the 2000s? Was that in the 90s?
I want to say it was like 98, 99,
Yeah,
something like that.
but like we're only like okay, so that's like 10 years out from The Abyss, right? Which is the first movie I can remember that heavily used CGI, you know? And that was 89, you know? So I don't know. I think maybe my whole point is we shouldn't be so hard on CG. Maybe that's my point, you know? Give it a little pass when we talk about these movies that are still in its infancy, you know, of
Hmm.
using this technology to be a little bit more generous with how we
Yeah.
talk about it, you
Well,
know.
and that's kind of why I mentioned, like, it'd be great to have like a younger perspective on that, because I feel like things like that where you grow up with it, it just becomes an accepted part of the fiction. Just like us with the monster movies, it might look a little crummy, but kind of gets the job done somehow. It's like like we just accept it as part and parcel of the fiction. And
Yeah,
when we see a new thing, we're, I don't want to say against it, but we just can't help but notice it, because it's, oh, here's a new thing that they're using all of a sudden.
right. It would actually be interesting to talk to a bunch of different age groups about it. Like a couple people from like, you know, in their mid 20s, mid 30s, something like that. See
Hmm.
what their thoughts are on this. Cuz I wonder if it's like cuz I look back at like Universal Monsters, Bela Lugosi, all those people, Boris Karloff. I like those movies a lot, but it took me a long time to appreciate them. You know, oh, it's in black and white, or
Yeah, right.
you know, uh, insert whatever thing some young person would say about a movie that's before their time. You know,
Well, hell, we were saying that back then too. Like,
yeah, that's what I mean. So it's like, yeah, like I don't know. Maybe that's the same mentality just moving forward. It just kind of moves up the the movies, you know, like
yeah.
the movies that they're talking about. Because maybe now they're talking about like I I wonder if they think the same thing about like the icons of the 80s as I thought about the Universal monsters, where it's like maybe they just appreciate them, but they're not in love with them. They don't have nostalgia for them.
Hmm.
Wrapping it all back together in a nice little bow, bringing it back to nostalgia, you know.
Those nostalgia glasses are a powerful thing.
Why is nostalgia so powerful?
That's a question I'd have to, I don't know, actually put some more thought into
Pontificate?
than we're. Yeah, I'd have to ruminate,
Ameliorate?
stroke my beard, and just kind of, yeah. I don't know. Th- there's times though where like nostalgia kind of works against you, because I've definitely started to feel that, where it's like there used to be things that I was super nostalgic for, and it's like now it's like it kind of just makes me sad how old it is.
You've mentioned that before. I have a different take on it. And I think it's valid, like what you said, like it makes you sad because it came out so long ago, right? So it's like looking back and into the past and
And it makes
realizing
you
how far
realize,
away you are from it,
yeah.
you know. But my take, because we were talking about, I think it was a conversation about something like a new movie or show referencing something from the 80s, right? Or 90s or something. And that was your take then, like what you just said. My thing was like, it makes me feel better, right? About the stuff from the past, right? Because it's like, it's, it makes it feel like it's not nostalgic at all in a weird way because it's like something new is coming out of that old thing again, right? And now a younger group of people knows what that thing is, right? In a weird way, it almost like takes it out of nostalgia, you know. Um, I wonder like what the influence was that Stranger Things had on Ghostbusters for young people. Like, did they go seek it out and understand what it was, or is that something for older people and that's it? You know,
Hmm.
But it makes me feel better that a new generation is might get curious about what these things are just by seeing it referenced in other things. So I have a different feeling about it.
Well,
Like it's
yeah,
like, oh
and
my god, these things that I love are living on, and new people are finding out about them.
well,
That's
and
great.
that's the positive quality of it too, because it's not just the hey, it's nostalgic. Like I love this thing because I'm a fan, and fans are really good at one thing, which is loving things that don't love them back.
Right. Right.
That's kind of the bad side of nostalgia. But the positive quality that you're talking about is that it kind of proves that this thing stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's all kind of like whatever your perspective is at the moment, I think. So I don't know, maybe I'm just going through one of those midlife crises I always hear about.
Possibly.
Give it another
I
year
don't
and we'll
know.
see how you feel.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't view it as a negative. It makes me happy, you know. Uh because it's like what you don't want is to have to explain to everybody what you're into and them not knowing what it's about at all. They're like, I have no idea what that thing is, you know. But
Hmm.
when you see like Ghostbusters being referenced heavily or something like that, it's like, yeah, of course, you know, that's awesome. That's great. Um, yeah, it's good. It's good.
And do you think that was this movie's intention, was to kind of weaponize nostalgia?
No,
Because it
I
really is
don't. I
sort of
don't
a
think it
love letter
was.
to Spielberg.
It is a letter to Spielberg, very much so. I don't think it's I think one of the reasons why movies keep going back to the 80s is not because it I think there's a lot to do with nostalgia, but I think it's something different, and I think it's more of not having technology, right? And that being a benefit to make difficulties in a story, right? Because right now, like, if a fucking monster dug a hole in a cemetery, Channel 6 News would be there so damn fast. They would be like, there's a monster over here digging a hole and building something below the earth,
Hmm.
right? Somehow we just find out about it because of cell phones, whatever. And I think when you take the benefit of technology as we have it today away, it creates problems for people that create you must have unique ways to solve them, right? And I think that might be a reason that the 80s specifically keeps getting dipped into because it's that time that's familiar before technology took off the way that it is. You're within a few years of everything changing to what it is will become today, and it's familiar. It's just familiar enough. I feel like the 70s is kind of too far away, and the 60s is like, what, everyone's listening to Elvis? Like, even the music that you can have from the 80s can sound similar to what it is today, you know? Um, so I think all these things, people can latch onto the movie. You can create problems that the characters have to solve that are unique that wouldn't even be existent because of the technology that we have today, you know?
Hmm.
So I think those are some of the core reasons why we keep because if it wasn't, why aren't we going back to the 70s or 60s or 50s for these movies? It's specific to the 80s that we keep double dipping into. Um we're not even at the 90s nostalgia yet. You know, we haven't even got there with the Jenko jeans and the slap bracelets and New Kids on the Block or anything like that. We're
Hmm.
still talking about whatever, Thriller, you know?
Well, yeah, I
So
mean, they tried with Fear Street, but I do feel like, I think you're onto something. They definitely do make those movies for different audiences, but I just feel like you know, for all the plot reasons that you've brought up, I think you're absolutely right on the money for. And I think that once our generation kind of ages out of like, oh, they're the ones that have money and they're consuming things, you know, then it'll move on to the 90s and then it'll move on to the 2000s and they'll start to have a lot harder problems than,
Right.
at least in terms of storytelling, because you won't be able to use those kind of devices. But no, I mean, they do make those movies for the different age groups. You know, just like with Spielberg, they're making West Side Story. I mean, that's for his generation. I don't
That's
feel like
true.
I don't feel like anybody was out there were like, oh man, we got to get that West Side Story remake. You know, can't wait for that. And kind of the same thing with that Elvis biopic, which was with Tom Hanks was in it, but it was really more about the manager kind of screwing him over. And you know, you've started to see that with like music a little bit, but it's those like 60s, 70s music stars like the, you know, Elton Johns and the Freddie Mercury's. You know, I mean, that's for a very specific generation too. But yeah, I don't know. I'll have to give this one a reappraisal sometime. And have to let it sit for a little bit, and you know, maybe we can get out of some of this '80s nostalgia. And you know, I know it definitely caught me bad kind of the first time I saw it, because for the reasons I laid out there with the you know, found footage confusion, even though this really isn't a found footage movie. I just lumped it into that category and held it against it for no reason of its own. And I think I'm just kind of like in a weird place with nostalgia myself, so it didn't really scratch the itch for me. But
Man.
you know,
And the reason why I'm bummed is I love this movie so much. I've probably seen it like 30 times.
30 times, wow.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love this movie. But it hits me like exactly where I want like a movie like this to hit, you know? Cuz like for me, like when I saw this the first time, it was like, this is impossible that we're getting another movie like Goonies, like Monster Squad all over again. And to be able to like hit that out of the park, I think is I guess for lack of a better word, a fucking miracle that someone was able to pull that off, you know? Because oddly enough, I put this movie in the category with those movies. You know, that's why I say it did it better than Stranger Things, you know? So, like, oh, you want to watch a adventure movie from the 80s that's totally impossible, but you want to believe it, you know? Yeah, we're going to watch this. You're going to love it. It's got a lot of heart, too. So,
Okay.
yeah, there you go. I'll stop gushing about this movie because you're just like, I can't wait to stop talking about this. I'm right, aren't I? You're like, oh, thank God. We're done. We're done. This fucking movie.
Until next week.
I can't wait till next week where we can talk about the movie I want to talk about. All right. I don't really have anything more to add.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess until the next one, everyone, thanks for listening as always, you know. All right. Talk to you soon.
Yep. I'll see you next time.
I can't think of the name. The Body Snatchers, right? Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah.
I feel like this is one of those types of movies, but does it in a unique way where you don't think that it's a body snatcher movie, you know?
Well, it doesn't get weird until it's like 40 minutes into it.
Yeah. Well, what was the weird part for you? Like
when they start punching the heads off robots and